In this lesson, we'll talk about stars or poles, as they're sometimes called. So we open up this scene. You can see that we've got a couple of characters here, and here we just have kind of a head bust, and then here we've got kind of a torso. So when we hear the term stars in terms of topology, what we're talking about is a vertex with a high valence, and that just means that it has more than 4 edges coming in to the point. Okay, so when you hear the term valence, we're just talking about basically the number of edges that are meeting at that particular point. So you can see that on this really clean looking topology up here, at a single point we have 1, 2, 3, 4 edges meeting at that point, and then it goes on the same thing here, 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 here. But when we start to build faces, especially, we want to create loops for creating animation, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next lesson. But the idea is that you have these edge loops going around. You can see how this is kind of isolated here, and the same thing around the mouth, and it sort of mimics the facial structures of the facial muscles, and so the animator can create nice deformations with that, and so we create these self-contained loops. Now, the side effect of creating these loops within this head geometry, the way that it's laid out, is that we get these 5-pointed stars or sort of poles here in certain areas of the model. So you can see at some of the corners of where this eye is, you can see that here at this point we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and now 5 edges coming in because we're creating that loop. And so we've got these edges flowing this way, we've got these edges flowing this way, and then where that meets up with this loop that we've created. We've got the same thing down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then up here as well. Okay. Now with the 5 edges coming in, typically there's not really a way to avoid that totally, having those on your mesh. Okay. You usually have a few of those around where you've created those loops. Okay. And so we want to try to maintain on any of those stars, we want to try to keep them 5 edges or less coming in to our single point. Okay, so we can have that, but we just want to keep it to 5 edges. Now if we look over here on this guy, you can see that there are a couple of areas where we've got those. We've got this geometry coming down along underneath the neck here, and you can see that we've got one here that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So this one we have actually 6 lines coming into this point. Now there are ways in this case where it's not crucial to the topology of the face or anything like that. We can actually fix these in a few different ways. So we can come in with our split polygon tool, come in from right over here, and instead of meeting at this point, we just come down one and then meet back up here, and then we can delete those edges, and now we have some options here. So right now you can see we have cleaned up the valence of the vertices here, but we have an n-gon here and an n-gon here. Now there's a simple way that we could fix it. We could come in and use our insert edge loop tool, add a new edge loop right in here, okay, and then connect that up, and that will create 2 stars where we had one sort of 6-pointed star or point there, and then we can create one with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on either side by bringing this geometry down here. Okay, but now this part is cleaned up a bit. Okay, now we could also come in and come across here and connect that up, and you see we still get quads, but we get these long thin quads, and so I think the result is not necessarily what we would want, although you could clean that up a little bit. The positive is you don't have to add extra resolution. In this case it's okay because the torso ends, but you're talking about adding a lot of extra polygons here. You could also come in and reroute those, as we did in our other lesson where we started to play with those kites. You could start to reroute those pieces of geometry. So if you have the ability to come in and add that extra line, that may be a cleaner way to do it. Okay, we can maybe compare on either side here. Let's go to split. And you can see this one it looks a little bit cleaner than this one where we've got these long thin polygons. Okay. Now over here on the back you can see we have another star right in here, another pole that we've got here. And so to clean this up, we can do the same sort of a thing. We'll go ahead and take our split polygon tool and we'll take this bottom one and kind of just bring it off of that point. Okay, and we can delete those edges. If I can select it, we can delete those edges. And then again here, if we want to bring down this point or this line, we could just bring this all the way down the back, and that gives us quad on this side, quad on this side, and kind of clean that up a little bit. So if you have the ability to add extra resolution, that's what you're going to need to do in many times to clean up any stars that you may have there. Okay, and you can see we've got another one right up in here. If you create your geometry in an application like ZBrush with your Z-spheres, sometimes you'll get elements like that you may need to come in and clean up. Okay. Now over here you'll see that we have a couple of those. You'll see some kites, examples of the kites that we talked about earlier. Okay. Now another thing that you can do is when you actually are working with maybe some more hard surface pieces and you're working with let's say a cylinder or a sphere, you'll have actual poles, which are very high valence vertices in the center. You can see up here on the top. And let's go ahead and reduce this, the subdivisions on the axis. Okay, so let's say we're making some sort of a bolt or some kind of cylinder, and we are going to be using a subdivision smoothing workflow. So we want to try to get rid of the triangles if we can. Okay, if we're going to be leaving it as is, we don't necessarily need to worry about that. But let's say we're going to be smoothing this and we want to get rid of some of those triangles. Okay, well, it's actually very easy to do on these poles by just selecting every other point, or every other line rather, and just deleting that. Okay, you still get the same silhouette, but now you're working with 4 quads instead of a bunch of triangles. You can still come in and add resolution for when we are actually going to smooth it. We can take these 4 faces, we can do an extrude and just kind of scale them down. Okay, so versus having this pole down here, we now have a single point in the middle, which is nice and clean. We can smooth it, and you can see the geometry is a lot cleaner. We've eliminated those triangles. So if you're using a smoothing method, subdivision algorithm, whatever it is that you're using, that can be a way to clean up the ends of those cylinder kind of shapes, or anywhere that you have a pole shape versus kind of a star on a character. This would maybe be more applicable to something that's on maybe a hard surface piece where you're trying to create a cylinder shape. Okay, so that's just a little bit on stars and these sort of higher valence vertices that you're going to come across when you're doing your character modeling. Keep in mind that a lot of those can't be avoided, but you do want to try to avoid the ones with 6 lines coming into them, and then try to get them in areas maybe which don't deform quite as much. But when you're working with different edge loops coming together in different ways, it can be hard to avoid. All right, so the next thing that we'll talk about is kind of how to sort of optimize topology when we do go in and smooth that. We kind of touched on it with the cylinder, but how smoothing can affect your topology, and then how we can start to add some resolution in our topology when we smooth it to maintain some hard edges, some issues people often have. So we'll talk about those things in the next lesson.